Construction site access, I've already mentioned that. That's always a challenge. Contractors and contracting, there's federal contracting is a little different than, private business contracting. So it takes time if we're going through that route, and contractors sometimes don't do what they say they're going to do, and we go through that whole process of trying to get them to do that, or go through the process to get what we should have got done by others, and legal issues. That doesn't happen often, but it does. Then post-restoration issues, which I'll talk a little bit about, and monitoring. We do monitoring, especially the bigger projects. It costs money. Sometimes we get volunteers. Sometimes we have money we can use through other means to monitor for uplift in terms of species numbers or habitat as a surrogate. So other challenges. This was a low water crossing in Wiley Drive in downtown Norfolk, and we were working with a number of other partners, which it always takes for these big projects, to put a new crossing in that was a bridge crossing. But of course we had 2 record floods during the process. And that's a cofferdam, steel sheet pile cofferdam. And there was a access all the way to it. And this was, they pump it out so they could pour the concrete. Well, obviously you can't do any of that when your causeway washes away and your cofferdam's underwater, which it was. One contractor left the wall of the ice plant that was supposed to be taken out and left, so we had to get another contractor to come in and remove that so it didn't fall on the nice people of Marion. So that happens. This wasn't ours, but this is in West Virginia, where when the water came down, this county road fell. It was on fill material that was, they called Red Dog, which was like a coal mining byproduct. So there was some, I guess, excuse for that. But it is one of those things you're really not sure about. You don't know, you can't know all the variables and all the possibilities, and things happen like that. You just have to be ready to react, because obviously you can't leave these people hanging, literally. Those issues. This was at that Veterans Park when I was talking about. After the water went down, some sand and gravel and cobble moved out, and there was bedrock. I'm like, oh, this is beautiful bedrock. Well, it was beautiful because it hadn't been exposed in 7,500 years. But the problem was it was pointing the water right against this bank. Bank failed. Had to get another contractor in, pull the trees out, grade the bank back, and it turned out all right. But still, surprise. So for future actions, this is one of the dams we're working on in Southwest Virginia. We're still going to continue working on dam removal, barrier removals like dams, and low water crossings. This is a water crossing on the South Fork of the Roanoke River. And like a lot of low water crossings, what happens is the river, during higher flows, eats out the edges, and they just keep on adding culverts and concrete and culverts and concrete. So it was much narrower at one time. But the problem is, rivers over wide, during lower flows, these culverts clog. It's a barrier to, in this case, log perch. And then we do a lot of riparian in-stream restoration using structures, stone structures and log structures. And we also do bank work and riparian buffering trees. So this is a project at Martins Creek that's now done, but it had a little problem with bank erosion and failure. In this one we actually had to do we do tribal consultation too, and one of the tribes has to do a survey. So we had to get a archaeologist out there and survey the area that was going to be impacted. And these are just some of the many partners we work with on our projects. And questions?
Questions for Dave?
What advice would you have for a future biologist going in the field pretty soon here? We've got about a month left. What advice do you have for somebody that's going into the field, particularly the restoration ecology
Well, I mean, there's a lot more consulting jobs out there than there are state or federal restoration jobs. I think working for a consultant is a good route to take initially, because you'll learn a lot about sort of what it takes to get a project going. Like anything, there's some firms that are, I guess, I admire more than others, just because they're more upfront about what they're doing. But there's a lot of good firms out there, and you'll learn a lot. I mean, you'll learn, wetland permitting. You'll learn, and you'll have to learn about different aspects of the project, because you'll have to do the permitting. Like I said, I learned some geotechnical, a little training on the job with the geologist while I was out there, and that consulting job actually was even more interesting for me, because I worked as an advisor to the town of Cape Charles on the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act and the Wetlands Act, the MRC Wetlands Act, and because a lot of things were going on at Cape Charles at the time that they really didn't have the staff for, so I learned a little bit about that process too. So you get a lot of opportunities, I think. Now, some you might get pigeonholed, but I think it's a good first step. You can also potentially get jobs in the state or federal or local, another one. But for restoration, true restoration work, we are like a consulting firm, except for the fact that we don't, what we're doing is pure habitat restoration. It's not mitigation, which is kind of replace losses that either will occur or have occurred as a result of a project. So we're a little different than that, but we get a lot of wear a lot of hats, which is both frustrating but also rewarding. As a consultant, you may only wear one hat, but you'll get some experience in it. So I mean, I think that's good. Like I said, the state and federal jobs are hard to come by, and they're slower to hire. Sometimes really slow. We lost someone last May, and we still haven't got permission to fill it, and I'm not sure when that'll happen. So private firms, they can respond much more quickly. And you'll probably get to do a lot of different things, just because a lot of times consulting firms are smaller staff. They're moving around a lot, so they're working together on different things. So that's a good first step, I think. And then a lot of people go from there to the state or the feds, and sometimes they go back. But I think you get a lot of on-the-job training and good practice at consulting firms. I'm not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying there's a lot more opportunities there. Yes,
I have a question about the science of the removal of some of the dams. You have a lot of sediment you mentioned behind them. Have you ever thought about removing the sediment before you
yes,
open the dam up?
And we have on occasion. This one had a lot of sediment, but it was also an access issue to get to the sediment, because these areas are all wooded going upstream. We removed sediment on that one, in fact, to a point. You run out of working space in some of those areas. We would have had to clear a lot of trees in the floodplain. Well, what was the floodplain? To get to that, and that's why we looked at modeling to see what would happen, and if we could release it, whether it would be better to release it incrementally or just let it go. I didn't let it go, because pulsing is what it's doing, which is what you, I guess, expect. It's not like it's all sitting there and as soon as you open it up, it just all dumps out. It's very incremental. But the problem with doing that is that you also don't give the river opportunity to restore those features, because there was a lot of cobble behind there, as well as sand, and there was silt, but the silt's coming down every day, and it's coming down in storm events in huge amounts. So yes, we did. and we do at times. It depends on where we are, what's downstream, and what's, what we think the effect is. And of course, endangered species folks, like if there's a critically endangered thing, we're not gonna do that. But the Veterans Park Dam didn't have that much sediment, for instance, the smaller dam. It was mostly cobble and gravel that sorted out pretty quickly downstream into riffles, which is what we wanted. So it just depends on what your goals are and what effects you think you're gonna have. But that big one, we went through a lot of hoops to get to the point where we could remove that the way we did. And it's working out like we thought, but you know, all these projects, when you do them, it's like I said last time I was here, you know, you break a number of eggs to create the restoration omelet, and it doesn't look pretty in the beginning, but ultimately it turns out pretty well. So yes, we do, but not necessarily, we don't do it all the time. It just depends, and depends on what kind of sediment's back there. If it's cobble gravel, then we're not worried about that. If there's a lot more fines, then we start thinking about what do we need to do, if anything. So, because sometimes we'll draw down and then we'll remove some sediment until we get the coarse material, and then we'll release. So,
So, just to clarify, so for our non-science accounting, business, computer science, so the consulting firms you mentioned also need to hire a lot of business types, is that
oh
right?
yeah, yeah, so right. I mean, they're like any business, and they have to have their IT support. They got to have budget people. They've got to have the whole raft of people support people, just like we do.
Okay. And then a science question. So first a comment. So I noticed your comment about the sediment-starved areas immediately downstream. I imagine that's the first place the sediment goes when released. But I wonder how similar that event, that release, is to something like a Hurricane Floyd, which has just tons of sediment entering the river.
Well, right, and you know, and again, the one big dam, I mean, it has such a huge sediment load coming in on a regular basis that when we looked at water quality sampling before, you know, and after, you know, there were peaks, but there were pretty significant peaks like that picture I showed you with it all coming over the dam, where, you know, it's just, there's a lot of sediment coming down, and when you've got a storm event like that, it's off the charts because there's so much material coming down, so much water coming down. And unfortunately, because of land use practices, that there's a lot of banks that are not well naturally stabilized, and so it's a great source for material coming down as well. But yeah, those storm events can really bring a lot of material down.
And the monitoring, real quickly, we're at just about out of time, but what are some of the monitoring elements? So you presence, absence, maybe abundance of the fish and the mussels.
And this, well, it depends. It depends on what, because some of the small projects we do before and after, in terms of like as-builts. We'll do some monitoring, biotic monitoring. It's a function of funding, but the big one, we've got consulting firms working on doing yearly monitoring for a number of factors, macroinvertebrates and water quality and cross sections. And you know, the floodplain modeling and the sediment transport modeling, you know, they cross sections all the way down to Leesville Reservoir.
So I would imagine oxygen concentration is a key one. Are they pretty low in those pool areas above the dam?
It is, and Nature's Dam builder, beavers were hard at work in there too, because it was, what little flowing water was, they'd help back it up. And so, yeah, the water quality, in fact, we just got recently through Friends of Rivers of Virginia, the one we work with, person we work with there, one of the landowners, you know, even though, you know, banks are eroding to getting back to what the normal profile would be, he said it's so much nicer because the water's flowing and it doesn't smell like methane.